Good evening. It is Monday, November 8th at 6 p.m. This is a meeting of the Community and Economic Development Committee. I am Lynn Snee, Chair of the committee, and to my right is Councilman Bill Rozelle. To my left is Councilman Bill Twiss. We have 3 items tonight, and we're going to start with our first item, which is to provide a recommendation to council regarding a vacant property registration program, which, as I read this, actually has 2 different directions. One is a discussion of a vacant property ordinance that was submitted by Council President Lutz for our review and assigned to this committee, and then a subsequent proposal by staff that they be directed to pursue a residential rental registration program. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to kind of take those one piece at a time and ask the committee if you have any comments, questions, or need further information about the vacant commercial property ordinance that was submitted to our committee.
I guess my question is, are we going to have a discussion on that? Because I took that as...
That's what I'm asking
okay.
for. Any items that you would like to discuss about the proposed ordinance? Any questions or discussion items?
I just had a question. Where did this generate and why, if only?
I have some opening comments I'd love to make that help.
Council President Lutz, since you submitted this, if you'd like to comment, you may.
One of the rare occasions I actually wrote out my prepared remarks, so please bear with me. Thank you very much for your consideration of this item this afternoon. I'm very grateful that this committee is looking at this item. Let me give a little bit of background on this issue. Last month, after hours of testimony and multiple meetings, the city's planning commission, by a 4-3 vote, decided to grant the owner of the building at 112-118 West Main Street conditional permission to demolish the structure and replace the structure with a grass lot. As I watched the deliberations of the planning commission and read the materials, there was one question that came to mind that was never asked. What can our community do to prevent these types of conversations from happening again in the future? This had been and continues to be a contentious issue that's dividing our community. While that is an important question, it's not an appropriate question for our city's planning commission to answer at this time, especially in the light of the application they were reviewing. Their role in the matter is pretty clear. Review the pertinent information in the zoning code, review the application brought forward, listen to any testimony given, ask thoughtful questions, and deliberate and discuss a resolution. So if the planning commission was not the correct forum to ask what can prevent these conversations from happening in the future, I believe that it's our council, made up of the elected representatives of our community, as the appropriate forum to have this discussion, a discussion that I'm grateful that is happening today. I took it upon myself to research other municipal codes throughout our state and see what ordinances existed to deal with these similar problems. I found ordinances from Xenia and Conneaut, both communities that have had some degree of commercial industrial disinvestment over the past few years. As I put forward my draft ordinance, I was never under the illusion that such an ordinance would be adopted letter by letter. The ordinance was meant simply as a starting point for discussion to prevent the abandonment of commercial properties, especially those commercial properties in our downtown area. I fully realize that the term abandonment is a strong word and should not be used lightly. However, it is public knowledge that the absentee corporate entity that currently owns the building at 112-118 West Main Street purchased the property in February of 2018, and it has remained vacant since that time. The building in question was vacant nearly 2 years before the January 2020 tornado, which was cited in the Planning Commission documents as the precipitating event that caused further damage. It's problematic that property owners are incentivized to keep vacant buildings, especially in our downtown area. Such buildings bring down property values, make our downtown less attractive to visitors and our own residents, and even in this particular situation, close down a public sidewalk for months on end. It's further problematic that the Planning Commission's recent decision may give a future plan to other owners of vacant properties downtown. Keep your property vacant as long as you can. Drive up the cost of rehabilitation to a point where it cannot be economically feasible to be saved, and the administration will support your desire to demolish a building and put in a grass lot. As I read the staff report for this particular item, I was particularly dismayed. The requested action from the report reads as follows. It is recommended that Troy City Council not adopt the draft vacant property ordinance for commercial and industrial properties as submitted. Rather, research and propose a residential rental registration program to more adequately address concerns related to vacant and non-owner occupied structures. In all honesty, if after all of the hours of deliberation by the Planning Commission and the pages of materials submitted on this issue, the best solution our city's administration can come up with is a residential rental registration program. This is truly a classic example of hitting the bullseye of the wrong target. I'm not saying there may not be problems with rental properties, but I also know that a rental registration program is going to cause significant burdens to small business owners in our community that are actually providing safe, decent, and secure housing for a significant number of residents. And any fees assessed by this program will be passed down to hardworking citizens that already feel that they're taxed enough already. I would postulate that such a program isn't going to decrease vacant residential properties, but rather just be a mere money grab by our city from those hardworking landlords that are working with their tenants to ensure safe housing. Worse off, a residential rental registration program is not going to solve the problem of preventing discussions like our community just had over 112, 118 West Main Street from happening again. If this committee wishes not to adopt the vacant property ordinance that was proposed, that's perfectly fine. I would have hoped that in their staff report that the administration would have taken the opportunity to create and propose an ordinance that would have helped our community proactively deal with the issue our community just went through. Rather, the city administration felt it was more appropriate to simply point out where the proposed ordinance simply fell short. But I would like to inform this committee, a residential rental registration program was not what I had envisioned for our community when I put forward my proposal to the city administration. And I'm absolutely gobsmacked that our administration, instead of studying and reviewing the real problem of vacant commercial properties in our downtown, found this the prime opportunity to introduce a residential rental registration program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lutz.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
if I
Mr.
may,
Titterington.
just a few things to rebut Mr. Lutz. The staff was merely reacting to a 7-page ordinance that was proposed to us that was specifically targeted towards, as Mr. Lutz mentioned, vacant commercial and industrial properties. And so our first challenge was to understand the scope of the vacancy problem among our commercial and industrial properties. I would like to correct the record on in one case, and that is that 112, 118 West Main Street has not been vacant since the current property owner purchased the building. It did in fact have a business until the tornado, and the building official deemed it the building too unsafe to occupy, and so the business that was there had to vacate the property. Mentioned, and I'm paraphrasing here, bullseye on the wrong target. When we looked at our property maintenance workload over the last year, just isolating this year and not looking at past years, which we can certainly do if the committee would like us to, what we have found is that our property maintenance workload is overwhelmingly on the residential side. And on that residential side, more often than not, it is rental properties that are generating the workload and not the owner-occupied structures. And so when we looked at whether or not we have a vacant commercial and industrial structure issue, we didn't find it. This was a very contentious issue. If you tune in tomorrow, you will see the next chapter in that ongoing saga. But beyond that, when it comes to commercial and industrial vacancies, particularly relative to the overall vacancy issue in Troy and indeed in Miami County, again, the issue is overwhelmingly on the residential side and not on the commercial and industrial side. We are blessed in this community that we have relatively quick turnover of properties and low vacancies when it comes to businesses. Again, our recommendation, as Mr. Lutz mentioned, is to not focus on an ordinance that addresses vacant commercial and industrial properties. It was our understanding, and President Lutz did mention Xenia. We actually looked in our area at Xenia and Middletown, as well as Centerville. Those are the three communities in our region that have adopted similar legislation such as what was proposed here. Xenia being the one that this was most closely modeled after. And in speaking, when staff spoke with Xenia and Middletown, they found that both communities have found their legislation unworkable and are not enforcing a program at this point. When we recommended looking at a residential inspection program, that was to address, again, property maintenance concerns that we've had, some of the other issues that we've seen throughout the years where there have been safety issues that have been uncovered too late. One of them being the furnace issue several years ago with the children involved. Most recently, an electrical issue that causes a fire at a residential structure, rental structure on East Franklin Street. Our intent with this ordinance was just if we wanted to look at inspections and we wanted to ensure that our property stock, could be residential, commercial, and or industrial, is up to code and is habitable either as a business or a residence, that a broader program be looked at, one that is an inspection beyond vacant commercial and industrial structures only. You may recall that earlier, a couple of months ago, the council did pass some legislation that amended the development department's organization structure, their personnel, their staffing levels, staffing classifications, and in the recommendation memo, we did identify that we would like to be looking at a rental inspection program and or a pre-sale inspection program focused primarily on the exterior and the property maintenance issues with the exterior of those properties. But when this came and it was addressing vacant structures, then, and knowing that there's at least one other community in Miami County that is beginning to look at the very same issue, that's when we recommended that if you do want to really look at the issue and place the bullseye on the right target, if you will, then looking at a broader, different program and bringing it back for further discussion might be warranted.
Okay.
Thank you.
Before opening this up for discussion, I will just say my thoughts about what's proposed, which I still see as two separate things. Understanding the issues that have been raised with the most recent item to come before Planning Commission that has brought these ideas forward with our property on Main Street, I can't say that I honestly see vacant commercial property as an issue that we deal with overall in the city. We've had a structure that has had lots and lots of discussion because of that issue, but I'm not sure I see it warranting an ordinance dealing specifically with that. That's just my thoughts up front, but I will listen to any other discussion.
I'm sort of on agreement with Ms. Snee here, but have we demolished any vacant buildings in Troy in the last 40 years?
Have we demolished any?
Commercial or
demolished-
Commercial, not
Commercial.
residential.
Oh. I imagine there are some that have.
Hobart would be obviously the big one,
Hobart, you have Gallon Camp, you have Olman's, you
The
have,
fire
but there,
station,
those
Canal Street.
demolitions were based on other companies coming in and have been replaced. Some of those were done knowing that other businesses were coming along those lines, correct? Like,
That's true.
like they're not just left vacant and those companies were looking to find the right time or find the right business to come and use that facility from there. So I agree with Lynn. I don't think it's an overall issue of all these vacant buildings in the city of downtown Troy, or that I think this might have been a unique situation of COVID along with tornado, along with some other things in there. So I don't know about making a policy for all commercial buildings at this time. I just don't think it warrants that.
I guess I took this as the document as a starting point for discussion. And it looks from the report, staff report to me, you pick various items out and we flipped it to the residential, which you've tried to explain here. I don't know whether it's to deal with a current problem. Part of that, I think, was my impression was that it was to get ahead of any problem that would occur again, like we had with 112, 118. What is the stat? How many vacant buildings do we have?
Commercial buildings, is that your question?
Brewery's empty, is that not correct?
Brewery, fresh building.
No, the building, the brewery building is not vacant. There is operations going on there. Not aware of,
I think we had an issue with it because we didn't know what vacant meant. Define
Well,
vacant is different.
and that's fine, and to me, that's a talking point, and you need to come up with a definition. I don't have a
Yeah.
problem with that, as well as all the other items that you guys cited. Whether it's 30 days or 90 days, if those aren't unreasonable, fine, the discussion should be what is reasonable, if you think we should go, if this group thinks we should go forward. So, I mean, all the things you've listed are well noted. Is there anything on there?
What do you?
The only one I
what is
would
vacant?
take issue with, I don't think it's going to be create an administrative burden for the auditor's office to crank out any refund checks. That's all he does. He cranks out checks. So, I mean, he's just getting a list. It's how many more are on the list to crank out for this month. So I don't think it's a burden to the auditor's office. But, I mean, the other ones are just, to me, are just discussion points that could.
Well, if I can just direct us back, to me, if Mr. Lutston sent this as a starting point, and I read through the ordinance, and I looked up other communities and the reasons they had vacant property ordinances, and it all seemed to stem from having just an overabundance
Yeah.
of vacant properties, mostly stemming back to the recession of 2008, and cities found themselves with vacant properties. And then more recently have created ordinances to try and deal with that. We have a problem that has existed for less than 2 years with one property, which is seeming to bring up this discussion. So to me, the basic decision is, do we feel like we need to pursue discussion of a vacant property property ordinance for vacant commercial properties. Because I don't think there's any need to go through this ordinance. I mean, I had plenty of questions that I sent in because I didn't understand definitions of words or how things would be managed or things like that. But beyond going through line by line, to me, the discussion is there a need for this type of ordinance?
Yes.
And I will
I would say
entertain
no.
discussion on that, and then we can decide how to go forward. So I've expressed my opinion that I don't think there's a need for this ordinance, and so I will open it up. Mr. Whitten?
Council members.
Council first.
Oh, I
Council
thought you were
first.
raising your hand. Mr. Seifert?
Thank you. Madam Chairperson, look, here's how I see this. This was completely distorted. Some guy came in and asked for a cheeseburger, and he got a Big Mac supersized from the city coming back. That's not what we intended to do here. The purpose of this was to look at whether there was a necessity to look at vacant buildings downtown. The Thrush Building, the brewery, we can discern what vacant means, whatever. I would tell you what came back with a residential application is something that I will never support.
And I see that as a separate issue.
I understand that.
So-
We are not but obviously the administration didn't because they put them together. Now we hear, oh, we've talked to Xenia and it wasn't working. We've talked to other communities. None of that's in the administration report. So the issue, I agree with you. I think you're handling this exactly correct. There's two issues. Do we need to expand and look at vacant buildings downtown? And having lived here 57 years, it's ebbs and flows. There was a period of time 20 years ago when downtown was pretty vacant. So we have to look at things not only in 2021, but 25 years from now. Is there something that we should put in place to make sure that buildings are vacant? What we got back was non-responsive to that question. And that's where my criticism is that's systemic, that's problematic, and those are the concerns that we've raised since the first day I ran for council. We ask a question, this is what we get back, and that's my concern. I think the committee should explore it. I do think that there should be some development, but with the response back, there's no ability to even have further discussion because we turned left at a signal where people wanted to turn right. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other council members with,
Hang on, Brad.
just wait a minute, any other council members with comments? Mr. Schilling?
First of all, the building that we've been talking about, while the ground floor at times has been used over the last 7 to 10 years, the upper floors of that building have been vacant for a very, very, very long time. There was nothing above those two top floors were, totally empty for a number of years. I think what Mr. Lutz brought up, I think is something that, is a starting point. Is there something that we can do within the document that he gave us? I mean, there's obviously some criticism that can we, as Mr. Roselle talked about, can we adjust this document to take care of some of the concerns that staff has about this document? That would be one thing. The other part of it is that can the city do something, can we in council do something that if we, through monitoring our downtown buildings, we see that there's a vacant, it's not the entire building isn't vacant, but there's a number of spaces in that building that are vacant. Is there something that we can do to say, hey, you approach the building owner and say, hey, look, can we help you? In other words, that the owner of the IOOF building didn't buy that building to keep it vacant. There's no reason for him to spend $600,000 and leave a building vacant. In other words, when he bought that building, he says, I've got some plans for this thing. And somewhere along the way, those plans got sidestepped. And so that's just that. I mean, so can we set up something within the city that, if a property owner suddenly finds him or herself with vacant spaces in their building, can they turn to the city and say, hey, I need some help? What type of resources are available so we can get.
We already have that. where
That
they can come.
exists.
Well,
I mean, what part of the
evidently, it wasn't used. I mean, as I said before, the IOOF building the top 2 floors of that building sat vacant for years.
But that's the property
person's
owner's
bought it.
decision, in my opinion.
He
But
bought
again,
it.
sometimes
Caroline also
sometimes,
sat vacant upstairs, so,
Madam
Yeah.
Chair.
yes, Mr.
So
Terrington.
that's what goes, I take issue on behalf of the staff that we were not responsive with this. And there's a perfect example of how different interpretations are being brought to bear on this. So you're talking about upper floors that have been vacant, which, without doing a very intrusive census of every building, not only in the downtown, but everywhere, we'd probably find that throughout the years, there have been plenty of upper floors that have been vacant. But does that make a vacant structure?
well, no, it
Or
doesn't.
is a
I
vacant
agree
structure
that,
one that's totally vacant?
but
Yes,
that
this
shows us that there's a problem. In other words, that if.
Not necessarily.
Well, I mean, who's gonna buy a building and say, well, I'm gonna leave the top 2 floors empty?
If they're able, well, okay, for example, the Caroline building, for a number of years, the second and third story were vacant. They were renting out the first floor.
Right.
They were making enough rent so that they could build equity and then gradually build out the second and the third story. One property owner built the second floor, ended up getting into financial difficulties, ended up selling it. A half of the third floor has now been done, and only now recently is the second half of that being done. In every case, the city has been involved with financing programs. We have had them in place. We have always been very proactive in reaching out to any and every property owner. This building that sparked the interest in this particular draft legislation would have been an issue for discussion at the community level a year to a year and a half ago, but in return for allowing the fencing to go up, we've been working with them to try to get that building, that property redeveloped before
Absolutely.
it got to this point.
Yeah.
We have been very proactive. This ordinance, or this report here is addressing what was put in front of us, where we were given not a lot of time to do it and to respond to it. And only recently, as a matter of fact, today or Friday, did we finally get responses from the other communities. So we've been working as much as we can, and that's why I made sure that I presented it to this committee before we got into the details of this draft legislation. We are very, very clear that we see some problems with this. We answered it, recognizing that maybe there's a bigger issue, and given the fact that in the past memo that we sent to the council, we did talk about other issues with property maintenance and inspection issues as part of the reorganization of the development department. So I think that we've been very on point, if you will, when it comes to this memo, and have tried to list everything out so that we could have a careful discussion about it.
My only concern is that in the document that Mr. Lutz proposed, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, is there something there that we can use to help our downtown continue to get, continue to be fully rented? And again, if there are, as I say, as you mentioned the Caroline, the plan was there is to, gradually, get the first floor going, then build the second and third, and that's what you want. But the IOF building, before Mr. Kimmel bought it, was essentially, there was nothing going on And there was never any plans to develop those upper 2 floors before he bought the building. I don't know who owned that building, but I do know that
Can I just interject here? This is the thing I want us to continue to focus on. It is the 112 to 118 Main Street that has brought up this discussion, but the discussion now is whether or not we need a vacant commercial property ordinance,
and
not just solely dealing with that building.
And I understand that, and what I'm saying is that the document that Mr. Lutz presented, is there something in there that we can utilize to help us, hate to use the word manage, but maintain the downtown buildings? To help the business owners, the building owners, help them, if there's something in there that we can, is there something in that document that we can utilize? Okay, so that's the question.
Okay,
Then it
thank
needs
you
to
for
go
your
back.
question.
Then it needs to go back.
So that's what I'm trying to say on that.
Yeah, it's not,
I think
As
one of the
is, it's
things
not
we are
working.
trying to determine today, rather than just taking the send it back to staff road, is whether or not there really is an appetite on council to want to look at this type of ordinance. And that is what I am trying through this discussion to understand, so that this committee can make a decision about how to move forward. I've said what I think, and that is that we don't need it. I've asked Mr. Twist and I've asked Mr. Rozelle. I will listen to anyone's comments, but I really want to keep it focused on the overall vacant commercial property ordinance, and then I will deal with the residential program proposed. Yes, sir. If you could state your name and address, please.
Sure. Ben Southerly, 5474 East State Route 41. I'm the president of the board for the Overfield Tavern Museum and a member of the Troy Historic Preservation Alliance. I would encourage members of council to have an appetite to look at this. I think what we saw in the case of the recent building was a need for more proactive conversations around our downtown buildings, as well as a more inclusive dialogue around our downtown buildings. You may not be aware that about a year ago, the Troy Historic Preservation Alliance, along with Troy Main Street, Troy Community Works, the Troy Reinvestment Fund, met with city officials and encouraged a more inclusive and proactive dialogue along these lines. I'm not advocating for or against this specific ordinance, but I really would strongly encourage the council committee to encourage a more inclusive dialogue, which has not really continued since that meeting last spring because of the 112 to 118 building, I think, coming up in the interim. But I think when you look at, there are several examples of underutilized buildings. There is the potential for additional underutilized buildings in the future. And I think where we get into trouble is when we look at the present state and feel that there isn't much of an issue, and then we get to the point where we're in an 11th hour situation, the Troy Planning Commission's in the hot seat, now the Board of Zoning Appeals is in the hot seat, and you find yourself in a very reactive situation. So I would encourage the council committee to encourage a more inclusive and proactive dialogue around this specific issue, not residential, but specifically commercial.
May I ask you to clarify? You mentioned underutilized buildings. Are you talking about buildings that could be redeveloped further, or actually vacant structures?
I think that's part of the conversation, you know, around these commercial buildings. I mean, I understand that when we're talking about the brewery building, there is technically a bail bond business in the building, and it's not technically vacant. But there are concerns about those buildings long-term if they remain underutilized.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
My name is Bradley Barron. I live at 105 Crestwood Drive, and I've been following this saga practically since the beginning. And I'm also kind of a halfway member of the Troy Historic Preservation Alliance. Haven't joined it yet, but I plan to. I said at the last Planning Commission meeting that what this whole saga has done is allowed demolition by neglect to become the new norm. What we have had is a greedy land speculator come into Troy buy a building and not do a darn thing with it, and then expect the city planning commission to bail him out of a bad business decision. Now, I'm just as gobsmacked as President Lutz is, if not more, at that. This property ordinance, as I said, I haven't read it, I don't know what it contains, but I think it's a good step in the right direction, because who's to say with one building, there won't be another, there won't be another, there won't be another, and we'll be right back where we were 25 years ago. A stagnant downtown that's not growing and is on a decline. And you all need to think about that. And for you to sit there and say, well, we don't need it, based on the here and now, to me, Mrs. Snee, is very disingenuous. It's disingenuous because you're not looking forward to the future. You're just stuck in the here and now, saying we don't have a problem. We may not have a problem now, but in 25 years we might. You don't know that. We could have another 2008 recession.
We could.
We could have another real estate problem. So why not prevent it now instead of having to have more conversations down the road? I just don't understand your reasoning.
I think my reasoning is, do we want to adopt an ordinance that puts extraordinary?
What kind of extraordinary burdens would it put? They register their property,
I have
they
read
pay
the
a fee,
ordinance.
and they're done.
No, sir.
They're done.
Let her answer, Brad.
This,
They're done.
this is an ordinance that I feel is not necessary as it's written. If council feels that they want to move forward with an ordinance that might address vacant commercial property, that's what we're here to find out about. I don't feel that we need one like this at this point.
Okay, what's wrong with the one we got? What's wrong with the proposal? Tell me what's wrong with it.
I don't want to go through it line by line. I have sent all my questions to
Well,
staff.
put it, if you say it's a problem, put it out there. Let's put it out there in the public.
Some of the questions they addressed were addressed. I'm not going to go
We're
through Mr. Lutz's proposal line by line
Well, but then-
and say that I didn't think it was written correctly, I don't understand the definitions, and all the kind of questions I have. If we have an ordinance that we have proposed, and it's passed through our legal department and our city law director, then I will discuss it.
Well, I think you're.
This is a discussion about whether or not we need this type of ordinance so that we could have an ordinance written in that fashion.
And my question, and my answer to that is yes, we do.
Thank you for your comment. Are there any other citizens or council members who wish to make a comment? So for this part of our discussion, committee members, I will just ask you to address whether or not we feel that this issue needs further study by staff, and we need to look at a vacant commercial property ordinance as it was proposed, or the idea that was proposed.
I'd say no.
Ms. Rosen?
I would be in favor of looking a little further than we have so far, if it doesn't meet line by line for his thing, but I think it's a topic that we need to look at to get ahead of, and I think we're way too focused on what's happened at 112, 118. I don't know what Patrick's referring to. If this would have been a year earlier, what we could have done to stop what 112, 118's turned into. But I think everybody would like it not to have another 112, 118 come up.
True.
So if it's proactive enough to avoid that, whether it's next year, 10 years down the road, I'm in favor of looking into that.
Well, with all due respect, I think this has come up because of 112, 118 Main Street, and I just view the idea as proposed to be far too intrusive for property owners. And at this point, I cannot agree with going forward to look at a vacant commercial property ordinance.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
may I suggest that if we're going to take a step back, since there may have been some misunderstanding, miscommunication, that there was some urgency, we do owe you some further review and research on the bigger issue. And again, I'm going back to the issue or opportunity, depending on glass half full, glass half empty, related to the Development Department's reorganization, when we did refer to the possibility of looking at one or several components of a more comprehensive program. We can start with doing some research based on the new census data and doing a deeper dive with an inventory of all zones, all types of uses, not just focusing on residential, commercial, or industrial, but looking at all of it, and take the opportunity to see what other best practices might be out there, and then we can bring that to you perhaps early next year.
I'll ask for the committee's input.
I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I would be for, if we're finding gaps within our current process that's not a total change or something totally new, I would be for that. That we're just updating or filling a gap. So
The
if you
information
wanna
that
do
I would like to see would have to clearly show what exists currently and why we would need any
Yeah.
type of registration program or requirements on a property owner to maintain things like insurance and to always let us know who the owner of the building is and have that posted on the building and all kinds of things that were brought up in this ordinance.
Understood.
I would need to clearly see that. If the committee is in agreement, then we can send that item back to staff.
Sure.
With the understanding that we would get that in probably a couple of months in the new year, back at this committee. Understanding that we are looking at that, is there any wish to discuss the currently proposed residential?
No.
No.
That'll be
I
part
think
of that
it
then.
needs to be part of it altogether.
Okay. And just for staff to know, I'm not super in favor of that either,
That
so,
seems to be more intrusive than the commercial
Yeah.
building.
And harder to monitor.
so there again would need to be a clear need shown. With that
All right.
recommendation, we will move on to item number 2 on our agenda tonight, which is to provide a recommendation to council regarding a proposed moratorium on parking lots and demolitions. Again, seemingly a two-part item, but we do have information from staff, including, and I thank them for this, a comment on what the law director has advised relating to moratoriums. I will entertain discussion on either of these items, but if we want to start with the parking lots, Mr. Tittering, do you have any other information to give us on the parking lots?
No,
Moratorium.
the idea of the parking lots was to be able to give council the opportunity to review the reports that we've had. We did find one that was as old as 1960, which was entertaining reading, and it's very easy to read since they used an Underwood typewriter to write the report. We did put all of those reports on our website in that publicly accessible section, so you can look at those. The idea of this moratorium, again, is to allow the council and the committee in particular to look at what we have and determine whether or not we need to move forward with a new study, or if there are any changes that, or any other direction that you want to give us related to that. Since it is, at this point, merely a review of the existing documentation, and after consulting with Mr. Kerber, who has always advised us that a moratorium should only be passed when there's a legitimate reason and for a length of time so that we can address that legitimate reason. We are recommending, I don't want to misquote,
90 days?
90 days for that moratorium. Also note that if the committee or the council decides that they need more time and It's because they want us to look further in answering any questions or any issues that the council has historically extended moratoriums for other reasons, and it's totally within your rights and ability to do that here if necessary.
And just to be clear, that was a moratorium on requests for new surface parking lots that are submitted. just to be clear.
We tried to be, and maybe Mr. Schilling, since you, or Mr. Seaver, we focused on public parking, surface lots that are where the parking lot is the principal permitted use, meaning that it is truly a public parking lot that would be available to the public either at a charge or free, but of course, I would imagine it would be charged. And the distinction is so that this moratorium would not prevent a redevelopment project with a building as part of it from, expanding, improving, restriping, whatever, the parking lot that is accessory to that building, that business, that mixed use, whatever.
On their property.
Use in that particular property, yes.
Okay, so it's not necessarily that it would be public parking, just that the parking would be the principal use on the property.
It can't be a public if it's a principal use, that means it's only a parking lot, so it's only for, the parking lot is the business, so it's a public parking lot. It's not for the workers on the same property where the building has been redeveloped or renters of a residential apartment or condo, for example.
Is there any other comment on that part of the moratorium request? Yes, Mr. Schilling.
First of all, I'd like to thank the committee for considering this. I think I said pretty much everything when I presented it. But again, the important part here is that the question is that, do we need more single-level parking lots in downtown Troy? Every time we tear down a building to provide a parking lot, essentially that denies a business the opportunity to come to downtown Troy and establish themselves and hire workers and produce something, pay taxes, the whole thing. Or on the other side, it prevents a family or families to come, that want to live in downtown Troy. That's just one less place that they have as a choice because the building is gone. And so in this respect, one of the questions I'd like the committee to consider is, do we need any more single-level public parking lots in downtown Troy right now for the foreseeable future? So that's one of the questions I think that we ought to take a look at, and I think by studying these parking studies, Mr. Terry mentioned one in 1960. I know my dad was involved in one in the early 70s, and my sister was involved in one in the early 90s. So again, there's, we have over time, looked at this. I don't think we need to get an additional study. We just had a study done here within the last 18 months that I think, having read that one over, I think it enlightens us as to why maybe there's some other alternatives, and we may want to start to consider those as well. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments on the parking lot portion? The other moratorium we're asked to consider is on demolitions. And in this one, we are considering a moratorium of 180 days to allow the Development Department to research the ordinances of Ohio communities with historic downtowns and to consult with the law director. Mr. Tedderington, do you have anything to add to that?
Just to say that this one is a little bit more involved than the parking lot moratorium in that the Planning Commission has, through the last several years, had questions about the architectural review and the criteria related to demolitions in the historic downtown. There's also language that, in talking to Mr. Kerber, that is in need of being modernized. We'd like the opportunity to reach out through Troy Main Street to Heritage Ohio and get some other historic downtown language that may have some better, clearer criteria so that I don't think it'll ever eliminate the subjectivity, but maybe helps minimize it and make things clearer in cases where demolition certificates are being considered.
Okay.
And again, if we think we need more than 180 days, or it goes to the planning commission and they have a prolonged period of time where they discuss it, then we will come back to you and ask for more time. And I will say, Madam Chair, in both of these, since they are moratoriums, we expected that emergency legislation would be considered so that this could take effect immediately.
Okay. Are there any other comments, questions on demolitions, a demolition moratorium? Okay, so as I understand it, what we are recommending. Yes, question. Mr. Southerly.
Thank you. Ben Southerly, 5474 East State Route 41. Again, we're glad to hear Mr. Titterington mention the research that's going to happen through Troy Main Street involving Heritage Ohio. Again, we would like to advocate, if you consider a moratorium for a certain period of time, that during that there is some inclusive and proactive dialogue, both with Heritage Ohio, Troy Main Street, as well as other organizations in town, including Troy Community Works and the Troy Historic Preservation Alliance, as we would like to put forth during this time some suggestions for how we can ultimately strengthen the future of our downtowns collectively. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Bradley Wrangle, 105 Crestwood Drive. I won't be real brief here. You all heard me say this 2 council meetings ago, but during this moratorium, I would like to see this committee, or this council, seriously look at strengthening the requirements for demolition. Because as it sits right now, only 2 of the 4 demolition criteria have to be met in order for a certificate of appropriateness to be issued. I don't think that's enough. Because what happened with the 112, 118 building, and I know this is what's bringing it up, I know y'all don't want to hear about it. We're probably done to death with it.
We haven't had to deal with it before today.
I know, right? I strongly believe that all 4 criteria should have to be met, not just 2. Not just 2. Why do you say, now you may be looking at me asking, why do I say that? Because it allows, the way it's set up now allows for cherry picking. Mr. Kimball knew that he was not going to be able to prove 2 of the 4, so he picked the 2 that he knew he'd be able to prove. It shouldn't be that way. I honestly think if you're going to demolish a building, you should have to be able to prove all 4 criterion. And second, I just have one question. If this moratorium is approved, and I don't know the whole process of this, but would it apply to the IOOF building?
I don't believe so.
Because it'd be after the fact.
Well, it's in BZA right now, so doesn't that stay any other proceedings?
I couldn't answer that, but I don't believe so.
You know, I don't want us to be talking, if we can, about one particular building.
Yes.
Correct.
This is
I
a
agree.
long time coming. This building certainly brought it to
Forefront. Right.
the urgency that it is. But frankly, in the last 10 years, we've entertained and approved as a planning commission 11 different demolitions. None certainly as large and as controversial, I don't believe, although even the last one was not without some controversy. It has been an issue that has been percolating, and it's time that we really look at it. So, you know, the questions about grandfathering and an application that is in process is something that if it became an issue, we would certainly consult with the law director. But at a minimum, this moratorium would direct the staff to not accept any new petitions or applications for demolition certificates.
That's assuming the one's been applied for the 112-118. We don't know that it has or that it hasn't, correct?
That would not be a new application, as I
It would not be a new
understand it.
application. So,
Like I said, if we can keep it
So we're not talking
broader
about
than
specific.
talking about specific addresses, I think the moratorium would apply to any property within the map boundaries that I
Yes.
included in the.
well, if you're saying that, then it should apply to that one, Mr. Tittering, and I thank you for your non-answer.
So the question before us is whether or not we recommend to council that we have a 90-day moratorium on parking lots, and that is within the Historical Preservation Overlay District also. I want to be clear. The surface parking lot moratorium is also within the Historic Preservation Overlay
is.
District?
Correct.
Thank you. And also a 180-day moratorium on any new applications for demolition within the Historic Preservation Overlay District while staff researches potential amendments to the current ordinance language that we have. And those would both be emergency.
Correct, and just to be clear, these would, the demolition research would first go to the planning commission and get their input to make a recommendation to this committee like we would with any other zoning.
Because it's part of the zoning
amendments that
code.
are-
Okay,
Correct.
all right. Any final questions on that item? Then I will ask the committee's pleasure. And it is
Move
emergency.
forward.
So it is unanimous to move forward with emergency on both.
On
Okay,
both.
Both of those moratoriums.
And they will be two separate pieces of legislation.
Thank you. And finally, we have an item to come before us, which is a recommendation to council regarding the annexation petition filed for 2 acres from Concord Township, which is the Canfarelli annexation located on Washington Road. This is 3 pieces of legislation on, I believe, an expedited annexation.
That's correct.
Mr. Titterington, any other information on that?
It is a type 2 expedited procedure. We are asking for emergency legislation to comply with the timeline set out in the statute.
Okay. Any questions? Any questions from anybody else on this item? All right, then what is your pleasure?
Move forward.
Move forward with emergency on this item.
Do an emergency, yeah.
And I do not believe there are any other items to come before Community and Economic Development. So we are adjourned.